The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over Route 66. It was the kind of evening when the air was heavy with humidity, and the cicadas sang their eerie symphony from the nearby woods. Sarah and Mark had been driving for hours, their excitement for their cross-country road trip turning into exhaustion. Little did they know that their journey down the famed highway would lead them into the heart of a true urban legend. As the old asphalt ribbon of Route 66 stretched out before them, the couple noticed an unusual sign up ahead. It was weathered and faded, but the message was clear. Warning, do not stop after dark. Sarah, intrigued by the cryptic sign, turned to Mark and asked, "Should we stop and take a picture of it?" Mark, a skeptic by nature, chuckled, "Come on, babe, it's probably just a prank. No need to worry about urban legends." But Sarah had always been drawn to the mysterious and the supernatural, and the sign had sparked her curiosity. They continued driving, the miles rolling away beneath their tires. The moon rose higher in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the desolate road. The woods on either side seemed to close in on them, and the atmosphere grew heavier with each passing minute. Unease settled over the couple, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Suddenly, their car's headlights flickered and then died completely, leaving them in pitch darkness. Mark cursed and slammed on the brakes. "Damn it, the car just died. I knew we should have had it checked before the trip." Sarah's heart raced as they sat in the silence of the night. They were miles away from the nearest town, with no cell phone signal and no other cars in sight. The oppressive darkness outside the car felt suffocating, and Sarah couldn't help but think of the warning sign they had passed earlier. She whispered, "Maybe we should have heeded that sign." Mark grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of the car, determined to figure out what had gone wrong. Sarah hesitated but eventually joined him, clutching her phone like a lifeline. They opened the hood and examined the engine, but nothing seemed out of place. Just as they were about to give up and head back into the car, they heard it. A faint, haunting melody carried by the wind. It was the tune of an old lullaby, one that sent shivers down their spines. Sarah's eyes darted around the darkened woods, searching for the source of the eerie music. "Did you hear that, Mark?" Mark nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, I did. But it's probably just some kids messing around in the woods. Let's get back in the car and call for a tow." They hurried back into the car and locked the doors, but the lullaby continued to drift through the air. Sarah dialed the tow truck number, but her phone displayed no service. Panic set in as she realized they were truly isolated on that desolate stretch of Route 66. The lullaby grew louder, now accompanied by soft, ghostly whispers. The couple's hearts raced as they tried to block out the eerie sounds. Mark said, "We need to stay calm. Maybe someone will come by and help us soon." But as they waited in the dark, they noticed movement outside the car. Shadows danced in the moonlight, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She pointed out the window and whispered, "Mark, look." Figures emerged from the woods, moving with an unnatural grace. They were pale and gaunt, their faces obscured by long, matted hair. They glided toward the car, their fingers trailing along the windows. Sarah and Mark were paralyzed with fear as they watched the ghostly figures approach. The lullaby had grown louder now, echoing through the car as if the very air itself carried the haunting melody. The figures outside the car began to sing along in a mournful harmony, their voices chilling to the bone. Sarah and Mark couldn't understand the words, but the despair in the voices was unmistakable. Terror gripped the couple, and Sarah whispered, "What do they want? What are they singing?" Mark's voice trembled as he replied, "I don't know, but we have to get out of here." He fumbled for the car keys, desperately trying to start the engine, but the car remained dead. The figures outside pressed their ghostly hands against the windows, their eyes staring into the car with a hunger that sent a wave of dread through Sarah and Mark. The singing grew louder and more insistent, drowning out all rational thought. With a final, desperate effort, Mark turned the key, and the car roared to life. He slammed his foot on the gas pedal, and the car shot forward, leaving the haunting figures behind. The lullaby faded into the distance, but Sarah and Mark's fear lingered. They didn't stop until they reached the nearest town, where they finally found help and had their car repaired. The tow truck driver gave them a strange look when they mentioned their encounter on Route 66. As they continued their road trip, they couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled upon a true urban legend that night, one that would haunt their nightmares for years to come. The summer sun hung low in the western sky as the Johnson family embarked on their long-awaited road trip. Mark and Lisa, accompanied by their 2 children, Emily and Jake, had been planning this adventure for months. Packed into their trusty SUV, they set off on the open highway, ready for a journey they would never forget. Their route was an ambitious one, taking them through the heartland of America. They planned to visit historic sites, national parks, and quaint little towns. But it was the isolated stretch of highway through the desolate desert that would become etched in their memories forever. As the miles rolled on, the highway stretched ahead like an endless ribbon of asphalt. The landscape transformed from lush forests to barren deserts, the air growing heavy with the oppressive heat of the sun. They were in the middle of nowhere, and the GPS signal had long since disappeared. "Are we even on the right track, Mark?" Lisa asked, her voice tinged with worry as she glanced at the map spread across her lap. Mark squinted at the map and replied, "I'm pretty sure this is the right way. The GPS must be acting up because of the remote area." Emily, their teenage daughter, stared out of the window, her eyes scanning the seemingly endless desert. "This place is creepy," she said with a shiver. "I've read stories about people getting lost out here and never being found." Jake, the younger of the 2, chimed in, "Don't worry, Emily, Dad's got this. He's like a human GPS." Mark smiled at his son's faith in him, but couldn't help feeling a growing sense of unease. The highway seemed to go on and on with no signs of civilization in sight. The gas gauge was inching toward empty, and Mark was starting to worry that they might be lost. Just when Mark was about to suggest turning back, they spotted a lone gas station up ahead. It was a ramshackle building, the paint peeling and the windows dusty. A flickering neon sign read, "Last Stop." Relieved, Mark pulled into the gas station, and the family piled out of the car. The air was hot and dry, and a sense of isolation hung heavy around them. The gas station attendant, an elderly man with sun-weathered skin, emerged from the shadows. He greeted them with a toothless smile, his eyes squinting against the sun. "Good afternoon, folks," he said in a raspy voice. "You're the first customers I've had in days. What can I do for you?" Mark explained their situation, and the attendant nodded knowingly. "Happens all the time out here," he said. "Folks get turned around on this highway and end up here. Lucky for you, you found the last stop." They filled up the gas tank and decided to grab a quick bite to eat in the rundown diner next to the gas station. The interior was dimly lit, the walls adorned with faded photographs of travelers who had passed through over the years. The Johnsons were the only customers. As they sat down to eat, Mark noticed a weathered map on the wall that showed their current location. "See, we're not too far off track," he said to Lisa, trying to reassure her. Their meal was a somber affair, the atmosphere in the diner strangely oppressive. The food was bland, and the silence was broken only by the low hum of the ceiling fans. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the diner's walls were closing in on her, and Jake kept glancing nervously at the photos of long-forgotten travelers. As they left the diner, the gas station attendant approached them again. "I hope you enjoyed your meal," he said with a grin. "You folks be careful out there. This stretch of highway can be tricky." Mark thanked him, and they climbed back into their SUV, ready to continue their journey. But as they pulled back onto the highway, something felt off. The road seemed to stretch on forever, and the landscape was unfamiliar. "We should have reached the next town by now," Lisa said, her voice trembling. Mark checked the map again and realized with a sinking feeling that they had somehow gone off course. The last stop had led them astray. As panic set in, they turned the car around, desperate to find their way back to the highway they had left behind. But no matter which direction they drove, the highway seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, leading them deeper into the desert. Hours turned into days as they drove in circles, their supplies dwindling and their hope fading. The oppressive heat took its toll, and tempers flared within the confined space of the car. Emily was the first to notice the strange occurrences. She claimed to see figures moving in the desert at night, shadowy shapes that seemed to follow the car. Jake reported hearing whispers on the wind, voices that seemed to beckon him into the desert. Desperation drove them to make irrational decisions. Mark ignored the GPS entirely, relying on a combination of instinct and hope to guide them. Lisa tried calling for help on her phone, but there was no signal. One night, as they sat in the car in the darkness, the figures in the desert drew closer. Mark and Lisa watched in horror as they approached, their eyes reflecting the moonlight like those of nocturnal predators. Emily and Jake were frozen with fear, unable to look away from the approaching specters. Just when all hope seemed lost, the Johnsons heard the distant rumble of an engine. Headlights appeared on the horizon and a truck pulled up beside them. The driver was a rugged-looking man with a thick beard and a weathered face. "Lost, are you?" he asked with a knowing smile. Relief washed over Mark as he explained their predicament. The man nodded and said, "Happens all the time out here. You're not the first and you won't be the last." With the stranger's guidance, they finally found their way back to the highway they had left behind. The Johnsons thanked the man profusely, but he simply tipped his hat and drove off into the desert, disappearing into the night. As they continued their journey, they couldn't help but wonder who the mysterious man was and how he had found them in that endless desert. They had escaped the highway's clutches, but the memory of their harrowing ordeal would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The road trip continued, but they were forever changed by the experience. They learned that sometimes the most terrifying places aren't haunted houses or dark forests, but the desolate stretches of highway that seem to lead nowhere, trapping travelers in a never-ending nightmare. I was on a road trip with my parents, Michael and Sarah. The long hours of driving through the winding highways of New Mexico had taken a toll on all of us. We were in the middle of nowhere with the moon casting an eerie silver glow over the desert landscape. Exhausted, I reclined in the back seat, my eyelids growing heavy with each passing mile. "Dad, I'm so tired," I mumbled, my head nodding forward. My parents exchanged concerned glances, but they decided not to wake me. A short nap couldn't hurt, they thought. As our car continued along the desolate highway, my mom leaned over to adjust my blanket. That's when it happened. A chilling sensation washed over her like a frigid breeze on a hot summer night. She glanced out the window and gasped. A tall, shadowy figure raced alongside the car, its body flickering like a mirage. "Did you see that?" My mom whispered to my dad, her voice trembling. My dad's eyes would need as he focused on the figure. "What is that?" We watched in horror as the shadowy shape transformed before our eyes. It became a creature with elongated limbs, its skin a sickly gray, and its eyes glowing like two cold white flames. It moved with unnatural speed, keeping pace with our car. Fear gripped our hearts as we realized we were being pursued by something otherworldly. My dad accelerated, the engine roaring to life, but the creature matched our speed effortlessly. My mom frantically reached for her phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Just then, I stirred in the back seat, my sleep-addled mind registering the terror in my parents' voices. I sat up groggily, rubbing my eyes. "Mom! Dad! What's happening?" My dad yelled, "Ethan, get down!" as he slammed the gas pedal to the floor, attempting to outrun the relentless pursuer. But the creature was undeterred. It let out an otherworldly screech, a sound that chilled my bones. With a burst of unnatural strength, it reached out and grabbed the rear of the car, sending it into a terrifying spin. The world became a blur of lights and darkness as the car flipped over, metal screeching against the unforgiving highway. My world was turned upside down, and I clung to my seatbelt, my heart pounding in my chest. When the chaos finally came to a halt, I found myself hanging upside down in the wreckage. I groaned in pain, my head spinning. My parents were unconscious, and the car was badly mangled. Blood trickled down my face, but I managed to unbuckle myself and crawl out of the car. The creature was gone, vanished into the night, but I couldn't bring myself to care about that now. I frantically checked on my parents, fearing the worst. Miraculously, they were both alive, albeit injured and dazed. As I tried to make sense of the situation, I noticed something strange in the distance. The moonlight illuminated a twisted figure approaching. It was my own silhouette, but something was horribly wrong. My limbs were too long, my eyes glowed with malevolence, and a sinister grin stretched across my face. Terrified, I realized that whatever had pursued us on the highway had taken on my form. It was a skinwalker, a malevolent shape-shifting creature from Navajo legend. It had flipped our car and now wore my visage as a twisted mockery of humanity. I backed away, my heart racing as the skinwalker advanced. I knew I had to act fast to protect my parents. I grabbed a shard of glass from the wreckage and held it like a makeshift weapon. The skinwalker continued to mimic my every movement, taunting me with its unsettling smile. It reached out a hand, its fingers elongating like grotesque claws. Summoning every ounce of courage, I lunged forward, driving the shard of glass into the creature's chest. A deafening, inhuman scream filled the air, and the skinwalker convulsed and writhed in agony before dissipating into a black mist. My parents finally came to, disoriented but alive. They could hardly believe the horrific encounter I had just endured. We clung to each other, grateful to have survived the encounter with the skinwalker. The authorities arrived shortly after, drawn by the wreckage and the emergency signal from my mom's phone, which had miraculously found a signal. We were taken to the hospital. Our harrowing story met with disbelief. In the end, it was a tale we would only share with those who truly believed in the supernatural, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying things are not the product of fiction, but the nightmares that lurk on the midnight highways of the world. It was a moonless night when I found myself driving down a desolate stretch of highway, the headlights of my car slicing through the inky darkness. I was on my way home after visiting a friend, and I had miles to go before I reached any sign of civilization. The radio crackled with static, and the only sound that kept me company was the rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt. As I rounded a bend, my headlights illuminated a solitary figure by the side of the road. It was a young girl, her thumb extended in a classic hitchhiker's gesture. Her long, disheveled hair obscured most of her face, but her presence sent a shiver down my spine. Something about the situation felt off, but I couldn't leave a teenager alone on a deserted highway in the dead of night. I pulled over and rolled down the window, calling out to her, "Hey there, do you need a ride?" The girl turned to me, and I caught a glimpse of her pale, tear-streaked face. She nodded silently and climbed into the back seat, her presence casting an eerie chill inside the car. She didn't utter a word as I continued driving. The silence between us was deafening, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I stole glances at her through the rearview mirror, but her eyes remained hidden beneath the veil of her unkempt hair. After a few minutes, I finally mustered the courage to ask, "Are you okay?" She didn't respond, and a heavy unease settled over me like a shroud. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I felt as if her gaze was fixed on me. The minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity, and my pulse quickened as I contemplated what to do next. My instincts screamed at me to pull over and let her out, but my empathy for her apparent distress kept me driving. Finally, she broke the silence with a soft, haunting whisper. "Please, can you take me home?" I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, noticing her eyes for the first time. They were empty, devoid of any emotion, and they sent a shiver down my spine. "Of course," I replied, though my voice wavered. She gave me an address directing me to a remote, dilapidated house in the middle of nowhere. It was a place I would have never ventured to on my own, but I couldn't refuse her request. As we approached the house, the feeling of dread intensified. She thanked me quietly and stepped out of the car, disappearing into the darkness without a second glance. The moment she closed the door, I sped away from that forsaken place, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't until I was miles down the highway, my mind racing with fear and confusion, that I realized something chilling. Her address was for a long-abandoned house, its windows shattered and its walls crumbling. There was no way she lived there, and I couldn't understand how she had known that address. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had encountered something otherworldly that night, a hitchhiker from beyond the realm of the living. My encounter with the ghostly runaway teen haunted my dreams, and I was left with an unsettling truth. Some hitchhikers are not what they seem, and some encounters on the highway lead to a terror that defies explanation. The rain poured from the heavens in thick, relentless sheets, drumming a haunting rhythm on the windshield of my car as I sped down the desolate highway. The darkness of the night was only intensified by the absence of any other vehicles on the road. The world outside my cocoon of metal and glass was a blur of shadow and water, a disorienting maze of twisting lanes and obscured signs. My destination was a small, forgotten town, nestled deep in the heart of the forest, a place where the roads had no mercy for travelers. I had taken this desolate route as a shortcut, a decision I now deeply regretted as the rain showed no sign of letting up. My wipers labored to clear the windshield, but the downpour was relentless. Suddenly, my headlights revealed a figure standing on the shoulder of the road, a hitchhiker, drenched and shivering in the storm. A jolt of pity surged through me, and I pulled over, hoping to offer a brief respite to someone clearly in need. The stranger climbed into the back seat, their clothes clinging to their skeletal frame. Their face was hidden beneath a hood, a curtain of wet hair obscuring any features. They mumbled a quiet, "Thank you," and I nodded in response. I continued driving, the silence inside the car amplifying the pounding rain outside. Glancing at the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of the hitchhiker's reflection. Their eyes were like twin voids absorbing all light, and I couldn't help but shudder. "Where are you headed?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. No response came from the back seat. The hitchhiker remained still, their gaze locked onto me through the mirror, an unsettling intensity in their empty eyes. "Are you okay?" I tried again, growing increasingly uneasy. The hitchhiker finally spoke, their voice a low, rasping whisper that sent a chill down my spine. "Just keep driving." The miles stretched on, each one feeling longer and lonelier than the last. My unease grew with every passing minute. I glanced at the rearview mirror again and gasped. The hitchhiker's hood had fallen back, revealing their face, or rather the absence of one. There was nothing there, just a featureless expanse of pale skin. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding as I brought the car to a screeching halt. The hitchhiker's head snapped forward as if they had anticipated the sudden stop. They turned their eyeless gaze directly at me, and I felt a paralyzing terror grip my soul. "What are you?" I stammered, my voice barely more than a whisper. The hitchhiker's mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, revealing a gaping maw of darkness. "I am what you fear," they whispered, and the sound sent shivers down my spine. Without warning, the hitchhiker lunged forward, their featureless face inches from mine. I could feel their cold breath on my skin as they whispered, "Drive." I obeyed, my hands trembling on the steering wheel as I continued down the highway, tears mixing with the rain on my cheeks. The hitchhiker settled back into the rear seat, their formless eyes fixed on me. Minutes turned to hours as we drove through the night, the rain never ceasing. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was no longer in control of my own fate. The hitchhiker's presence was suffocating, their silence a torment. Finally, we reached the outskirts of the forgotten town I had been headed to. The hitchhiker pointed a bony finger towards a decrepit, overgrown path that led into the forest. "Stop here," they commanded. I pulled over, my heart racing as I watched the hitchhiker step out into the rain. They turned to me one last time, their eyeless gaze locking onto mine. "Remember me," they hissed before vanishing into the darkness of the forest. I watched them go, unable to tear my eyes away from the spot where they had disappeared. It was only when the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds that I finally gathered the courage to drive away. The memory of that night haunts me still, a dark specter that lingers in the corners of my mind. I know that I encountered something beyond the realm of the living on that rainy highway, something that defied explanation. And I can't help but wonder if the hitchhiker's whispered command to remember me is a curse that will haunt me for the rest of my days.